Hello, welcome back to That's Runnable. Today we're going to be talking about winter running. Winter is upon us, and it's harder to train in the winter. Anyone that says they prefer winter running is probably seeing the joy in winter running, but forgetting how easy it is to train when it's not Baltic, freezing outside, raining, dark, and all the other challenges. So, I'm someone who does like winter training, but recognises that it's always a bit easier when the days are longer, the weather's a bit more mild, and we don't have to worry about all of the extra kit and all the extra considerations. Anyway, today we're going to be going over winter training, and we're going to be covering off some training tips, why now is the time to get in the gym, some points on immune system care, and then how to stay motivated in this time. If you're out for a run right now and you are training in the winter, good on you, well done for getting out there. I also recognise that not everyone tuning in is going to be in a winter. Not everyone right now is enduring winter. But here in the UK, here in London, it is winter. So that's what's top of mind. And a big proportion of you are from the UK. So it should make sense for you. But this will be an episode hopefully you can revisit if you're approaching winter at a different time of year. Before we get started, I want to just quickly mention Innovate, the sponsor of this episode. I've been working with Innovate now for a little bit of time, and I've been talking with them for a longer period of time before we struck any sort of partnership. And I really got to know the team, how they operate, and I really love Innovate, the brand, but I really love the guys behind Innovate as well. They live and breathe this stuff. They really know what they're doing. They care a lot about runners. They care a lot about how their gear works in the environments that we're using their gear. And specifically, they're a master of making amazing trail shoes. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of their shoes that I have on rotation. I've got the Road Flies, the Trail Flies, and the Trail Talons, as well as the Trail Talon Speeds. And this is just a great mix of shoes. And as far as my rotation goes, the shoes that I look forward to wearing the most are my Innovates currently. And I just really think that you should give some of them a go. If you're not looking for shoes and you just want some good gear, I'm also wearing a lot of their apparel at the moment, and it's also my favorite stuff to put on. So you can get a discount, a 15% discount on all of their stuff at innovate.com, INOV8.com, with the code Runnable. So that's 15% off with the code Runnable at checkout. Check out Innovate. It's a great brand. They're doing great things and they make amazing products. So thanks Innovate for sponsoring this podcast. If you wanted to support the podcast, you wanted to support Innovate, a brand that I really want to see continue to succeed, go and check them out and use the code Runnable at checkout for a little 15% discount. So, winter running. That's what we're talking about today. I have 5 segments for you here, and I'm going to try and keep this a bit more casual. What I've sort of noticed when I've been sitting down and recording these is I've actually been getting increasingly tight and pressured on myself to make sure I cover off everything. I don't say ums and ahs, and I deliver it in the best way possible. I do, of course, want to deliver it in the best way possible, but I don't want to sound like a robot. And I think there's a balance to strike with this all. And I'm getting better at it, I think, as I do more of this sort of stuff. I'm going to try to just be a little bit more casual with you because I think it can be a bit much sort of listening to one voice. And the plans for this episode are, yes, another solo episode, but the plan for the podcast is to involve people as much as possible. This isn't ever going to be like a guest podcast because really my ambition with the podcast is just to open the door to long form audio. and that doesn't necessarily need to always be interviews, but I am interested in bringing people on to talk, bringing experts on to talk about certain things where we might need a segment of real, true expertise and not just me waffling. But for the most part, we're going to continue doing these solo episodes. I enjoy making them, and I really enjoy sort of diving deeply into all these topics that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do on social media and that sort of stuff. Sorry, just take a sip of my coffee. And so, yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd ramble on that for a second. And I hope that this episode feels a little bit more casual and I guess less scripted and not less structured, but anyway, already waffling. So here we go. I've got 5 segments for you in this episode about winter running. Winter is a tough one. A lot of people stop throughout. So the first segment is posing a bit of a question. Is winter running worth it? And then segment 2 will go on to a few training tips for winter running. And then we will go to segment 3, gym season. The importance of training in the gym or making the most of the gym at this time. And then I want to talk a bit about immune system care. And then a few tips on staying motivated to get out the door throughout winter. So why don't we just dive straight into segment 1? Is winter running worth it? Is winter running worth it? Well, I would say yes. I think winter poses a unique challenge. If you think about summer running, and when I say, these seasons, obviously it's going to be different for every place you're in. Summer in Texas is going to be a lot more difficult than summer in London. Winter in Finland is going to be a lot more difficult than winter in London. But I think there's a lot you can still take a lot away from this, and if you can kind of just apply the certain weather conditions I'm talking about to where you are, then maybe that's helpful. But winter does pose a unique challenge that summer doesn't. Summer has its own challenges, but there are certain things about winter that just make it tougher. It makes it harder to get out the door and train consistently. One of those things is the shorter days. I find the short days just they just make it a lot harder for me personally. I am someone who has been disciplined enough to get up nice and early in the morning, regardless of whether the sun's up or not, and go for it. But it just makes it harder. The weather is an obvious one. It's always going to be colder in the winter. And once you get down to single digits, -Celsius degrees, sub-zero, then it really gets tough and you have to start thinking about bracing that cold, bracing the weather conditions. There's also, you're more likely to have a bit of a rainy season. I don't hate running in the rain, but I hate the rumination beforehand. But once you're out there, it's always kind of good, to be honest. And then what else do we have that makes it harder? It's the gear. It's all the gear, I think, that you have to deal with and think about. Layering up. Am I wearing too much? Am I wearing too little? All of that. And it's, I don't think you'll ever get to a point in your running journey, your running life, where you never make mistakes with your clothing, how much you wear, how little you wear on a run. I still sometimes leave and I'm 20 minutes into a run and I'm just way too hot. Or, I step out the door and I really feel quite cold and I can't warm up on my easy run very easily. There's all sorts of issues that make it tough. But that is what makes it worth it. That is what makes it worth it. The mental toughness factor. The mental toughness factor. It's good to have a challenge like this on an annual basis, a full season to approach with vigor and to look at it like a positive thing, a potentially positive thing for you, is a great and beneficial thing. And studies actually show, I read this on the internet, Studies show that running in challenging conditions like winter can boost mental resilience by as much as 30% compared to running in ideal weather. I mean, it's not a very difficult one to not believe. Not a very difficult one to believe, I mean. And it says a lot. I think it says a lot. So there's that mental toughness factor. You're going to be, if you're running in the winter, you're going to be boosting your mental resilience, and that is only a good thing. So that's one reason why winter running is worth it. And then the second and kind of most important, I think, for me is that consistency is king. I think if you've watched or listened to me and what I've been talking about for any time, you probably will have heard me ring the bell of consistency being the most important thing. Consistency over a long period of time is really what gets you the results that you want, gets you the success that you want. And that is no different once winter comes around. If you can remain consistent through winter, if you can keep showing up in some capacity and even just maintain your fitness, you will prevent what many call the dreaded spring regret. I don't know if any of you, maybe you've heard the term winter miles equals summer smiles. I think it's a cycling term. I think cyclists and triathletes use that, but it's pretty self-explanatory. If you can brace the cold of the winter, if you can get your training and stay consistent, you won't regret it. You won't have that spring regret, and you'll have summer smiles because you'll be enjoying the summer a lot more because you've really got the training in, you kept consistent. It's funny, running consistently through winter can actually improve aerobic base by up to 10 to 15%. And so that gives you a more solid foundation when race season rolls around. There are a lot of benefits to training in the winter. Needless to say, the temperature is lower. So what that means is you are more likely to be able to actually train with a lower heart rate. That is the fact of the matter. Training in the summer, I mean, how many of you have tried training easy and your heart rate's just elevated because it's so hot and your body's in overdrive trying to cool down, so you're sweating? In the winter, things sometimes become a lot easier in some ways, and you can actually really improve your aerobic base, your aerobic fitness, because you're consistently getting your training in, and you're doing so in an environment where it's kind of easier to get those miles in with a low heart rate. So especially if you're doing low heart rate training, if you're doing sort of zone 2 training, zone 1 training, that sort of thing, it may be easier for you to do so in the colder months. And so getting your training in at this time will help you as you approach spring and summer and go into an environment where it might be more challenging to train consistently and get that easy training in. And the same goes for fast training. You know, it's a lot harder to do sprints in a lot of heat. If it's really warm, it's really humid. In the summer, getting your intervals in, it's going to be difficult. Whereas in the winter, as long as it's not slippy underfoot, you have a real advantage of being able to actually go to those top speeds with a little bit more comfort, potentially. And, adapting to the cold, training through the winter and adapting to the cold can actually increase your body's ability to regulate temperatures in races or just more generally. So you have this mental toughness factor. Studies show that running in challenging conditions like winter can boost mental resilience. Consistency is king. And when you live in a country like, I don't know, the UK or somewhere in the sort of northern hemisphere, there's a lot of time throughout the year where it's, suboptimal weather conditions. So if you're only training when it's perfect weather conditions, you won't really get that consistency. So if consistency is king, then you should be training in the winter, because you're going to be preventing that dreaded spring regret, and you have opportunities in the winter that you may not even have necessarily in the summer or in warmer months. So running in the winter is worth it. Segment 2. Second segment. Don't know if you heard Lou sneeze in the background there. Sorry about that. Training tips for winter running. So, there's a lot we could go through here. There's a lot. And, it's going to be different for each individual, as a lot of this stuff is. I feel like in every podcast episode I record, I'm constantly thinking of the caveat. It depends on the individual, personal circumstances, all of this sort of stuff. So there's always that caveat sort of lingering throughout the content I make, I guess. But the first thing we're going to talk about is layering properly. This is actually a little bit more complex than you might think. I mean, we don't want to overcomplicate things for the sake of overcomplicating them. Obviously, you want to add some layers if it's colder. You want to make sure you're not wearing too much. It's quite simple. Striking the balance is a challenge. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some of the kind of science, I guess, behind layering up and the challenges that we face. So, firstly, I'll say that having some sort of windproof or thermal options available to you in certain temperatures is really quite a good idea. If you can have thermals and then just throw on some sort of windproof jacket, a lot of waterproofs are also branded as windproof, advertised as windproof. So, there's a lot of stuff from Innovate, of course, that I can encourage you to go and check out. There's all sorts of brands that offer that sort of kit. But in terms of just like a pretty simple setup, I would say, thinking about the waterproofs and windproof jackets and then having some thermal options. But we'll move on in a bit about how you can kind of think about layers and what are the differences between all the layers and base layers, mid layers, all that sort of stuff. But it's quite interesting. Apparently, every 1 degree Celsius drop in temperature, so every time the temperature drops by a degree, that increases heat loss from your body by about 10%. So layers make a huge difference in retaining warmth without overheating. Heat loss might not be something that you necessarily think about when you're thinking about kind of keeping yourself warm. You're keeping yourself from being cold. You're not necessarily thinking about stopping the amount of heat being lost from your body. But how that kind of happens is, 4 ways. You have conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. So on the conduction front, when you have direct contact with cold air or cold surfaces, like, for example, when you sit on a cold bench, that pulls heat away from your body. And the colder the air, the faster this heat transfer happens. So there's a conduction element to it. So when you have really cold air, the heat that is being lost from your body is being lost quicker because it's touching your skin, And so there's this conduction element. Convection, when the air moves over your skin, it kind of removes the thin layer of warmth that, like, there's a thin layer of warm air that your body generates that's all around your skin. And when there's like air, cold air moving over your skin, especially when it's windy, that kind of removes that thin protective warm layer, which kind of wind kind of amplifies this effect. We know this obviously as the wind chill factor. So for example, a 0 degree Celsius day is frozen. 0 degree Celsius day, it's 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 frozen. 0 degree Celsius day, with a strong wind can feel like -10 because you are losing that protective layer with the wind moving over your skin. Then you have radiation. So your body naturally radiates heat into the environment, and the colder the surrounding air, the more significant this sort of heat loss. And then we have evaporation. So when you sweat cools your body as it evaporates, which is useful obviously in warm weather, but it can be very dangerous in the cold. Wet skin cools about 25 times faster than dry skin in cold conditions. So sweat management is really critical. So you don't want to be putting too many layers on, because if you get too warm, your body will sweat, causing a layer of liquid of sweat around your body. And wet skin cools really fast. That's what it's there for, to cool you down. But if you're in a really cold environment and you're dressing too warm and you sweat, when you stop exercising and your body cools down, you can get really cold. So it's really important to be cognizant of that as well. The human body operates at around 37 degrees Celsius internally, and your skin temperature is generally lower than that. And the larger the gap between your skin and the air temperature, the faster heat escapes. So a 1 degree Celsius drop creates a real noticeable difference because the rate of heat loss accelerates exponentially in colder conditions, particularly below 5 degrees Celsius, where blood flow to extremities decreases to preserve core warmth. So an example of this might be that if it's 10 degrees Celsius, your body might lose heat at a manageable rate, but you drop it down to 5 degrees Celsius and suddenly you're losing heat far more rapidly, especially if it's windy or if it's wet. And those are the times we're in now. We're in sub 5 degrees Celsius times. So you have to be far more cognizant of how you're layering up, and the fact that with every degree dropping, you lose 10% more heat from your body. So how do layers make a difference? How do layers make a difference? Well, to combat this increased heat loss without overheating or getting too hot, layering is an essential piece of the puzzle. And here's how it works. This is actually something that many didn't realize before, I think, around the 70s. You'd have a lot of outdoors people or outdoors companies, brands making outdoor clothing, and they would try and create the warmest jacket. And they still do that. Obviously, they still make jackets that are as warm as possible. But it wasn't until, I think, maybe the 60s, 70s, I could be completely wrong, could be earlier, there was a stage in which people started realizing the value of layering and how much more effective having basically 3 different layers at least is for managing your body temperature. So these 3 layers are a base layer, a mid layer, and an outer layer. And when you're running, of course, you might not need to have 3 layers, but when you're running, having multiple thin layers is going to be really helpful. So if you're running in one really thick piece of clothing, you're not going to be able to manage, delayer, layer up your layering. Not going to be able to manage your clothing as easily. Excuse me. So, base layer. Your base layer is for your moisture management. So it kind of wicks sweat away from the skin to keep you dry, keep your skin dry. And materials on your base layer should be sort of synthetic fabrics or merino wool. I would avoid cotton. And that can be like a bit of a thermal layer if it's really cold. Or it can also just be like what I call skins, like a tight layer. But what that's doing is moisture management. So it's sort of taking in the moisture, the sweat away from the skin. So it keeps you dry. Then you have the mid layer, which is for insulation. And this kind of traps body heat by sort of creating air pockets. And you might have, for this layer, if it's really cold, you might have like a fleece or down or other sort of lightweight insulators. You might have just a sort of gilet, so a sleeveless down jacket, or you can get all sorts of sort of plastic down and maybe like a fleece. I, for my mid layer, have something from Innovate, which is like a gilet, and it's Pertex, so it's not Gore-Tex, it's Pertex, which is better for the environment. And it's got like a fleece inner, and that just keeps my body nice and warm. And then if it's really cold, I've obviously just got my base layer that is exposed to the elements, and then I've got my gilet. But if it's really cold, I can put an outer layer on that as well, which can be like water and wind resistance, like a jacket of some kind. And it's usually, if it's a running jacket, it would be breathable to some extent. You can get Gore-Tex, you can get Pertex, you can get Nikwax, which is the latter two. They're better for the environment. And this will basically protect you against like wind chill and precipitation, like snow or rain. And it's quite important to have these sort of breathable shells at least available to you, because if your base layer is sort of taking in the moisture and keeping you dry as it can, and then you have like a mid layer sort of trapping body heat, then if you're getting completely wet, or if the wind is blowing at you, then it can kind of counteract that a little bit. So having an outer layer as an option can be really helpful. So that's sort of how layers make a difference. Now I want to talk a little bit very briefly about why overheating is a problem, and why you, although I've just gone over 3 different layers, why you should maybe think about being bold and starting cold. It's a little tip I always use: be bold, start cold. If you're starting off your run and you're comfortable, then you're probably going to heat up a bit too much. And that's a problem. Why is it a problem? Well, sweating in cold weather can be dangerous because sweat soaks through layers and it cools your body very quickly. That's the whole idea of sweat. Cools your body like 25 times quicker than if you weren't sweating. And a really good layering system helps you regulate that. You don't want to be on a long run, overheating, sweating, and then have to stop for whatever reason. You could sprain your ankle and then you're forced to stop, and then you have this shock, and then you have the fact that your body was working hard to cool down, and now all of a sudden you stopped and you will cool down rapidly, and you could get hypothermia. So having a good system, layering system, is really important, and it helps you regulate that heat. And you can, with this, when I talk about system, I mean, having 3 layers, but then also having, I guess, tricks to pull on, whether it's just unzipping an outer layer during your kind of more intense part, or just like when you need to get a bit more comfortable, or peeling off a layer if you feel too warm, wrapping it around your waist, or adding layers. So when you're sort of in that cool down stage, you can add a layer on. It might be that you want to carry more layers with you. You might want to take a pack with you, even if it's a short run. Take something with you so that you can just put that layer in the back so it's comfortable, and then maybe you're stopping at a coffee shop afterwards. You don't want to be in your running kit necessarily sitting down in the winter, so you might want to have those extra layers ready for after the run. So making sure that you're not overheating and having these options to delayer and to unzip or whatever is really important. So that's all a little bit of chat around, the importance of layering up and I guess kit and gear. On the bottom, on the bottoms, I usually have like some skins, some thermals, tights if it's really cold, and then I'll have some shorts over that. Or I might even just have shorts. It depends on the weather, obviously. But I might just have some shorts, and then if my upper body's nice and warm, then my legs kind of warm up. But I do quite like to have a bit of a thermal layer on the bottom. Cool. That's a lot about layering. It might be a little bit boring, but that's a bit about layering, how you can layer, how you can think about your different layers, what they do. But there is purpose to multiple layers, and why overheating is something you really want to try and avoid, and having a good system in place so that you can de-layer and layer up depending on the thing you're doing at the time. And now I want to just talk a little bit about adapting your runs. So obviously we're talking right now about training tips for winter running. We talked about layers. Now I want to talk about adapting your runs. In the winter months, in the colder months, it might be due to the weather that you actually need to adapt the runs you're going on. And this season as well, depending on when your races are, but this season is often a time that you can decrease your volume, and you can kind of change how you approach your training entirely. And we'll come on to that in the next segment very shortly, about gym training and making the most of getting into the gym and building some strength. But with your running, it might be that you want to actually slow down a bit. There's been times where I've been out running in the thick of the winter, in the middle of the winter, and it's been so wet outside and so icy outside that I actually just need to be really careful. I don't know why I said wet. I mean, just icy. It's been so icy outside, and I've needed to be careful about my footing. I very vividly remember running around Finsbury Park a few years ago, and this is when I was training for Trans Gran Canaria, which is a race in February, so I needed to get my training in through the winter, and it's kind of non-negotiable. And it was a really cold winter. It was very icy, and it takes a lot for it to snow and settle and ice up in London, just because it's a little bit warmer than, it's a bit warmer in the middle of the city. And it was very icy underfoot, and I was slipping around. I couldn't really get my training in all that well, so I had to adapt my training. I had to adapt the length of my run and focus more on how long I was out for rather than the pace I was going. So I shortened my routes. I slowed down a lot and just focused on getting time on the feet and doing it in a very careful way and choosing routes that were sort of safe to run over, and really factoring in the weather conditions and really going by effort rather than pace or any other stat. And that really helped me to keep showing up, to sunset my idea of what success looked like a bit, and just think about the time I was putting in, the effort I was putting in on a consistent basis, and focusing on just maintaining my fitness throughout that particularly icy, difficult time to train. Injury risk is really high in winter, and there's actually an estimated 70% of winter running injuries comes from slips or falls. So safety really is a non-negotiable. I've sprained my ankle out on a run. I've slipped and twisted a knee on a run. There's plenty you can accidentally do, and you really want to limit the chances of getting an injury, because it sucks. You don't want to do that. Don't want an injury. So be careful. Shorten your routes, slow your paces, factor in wind chill. Think about how you're approaching your training through the winter, because there's a lot more to have to deal with. Safety is really important as well. Obviously we're thinking about, you've got to be thinking about your footing, thinking about what's underfoot, and making sure that you're not trying to go too fast or doing intervals on icy roads. But also reflective gear and headlamps and being seen is so important. Obviously in the winter, we have shorter days. Here in the UK, I know some of you are listening as well from the Nordics, where some of your winters are pretty dark, and your summers are you have nice long days. I mean, we have a bit of that in the UK, nice long days. We don't have midsummer sort of level long day, but we have nice long days. But it does mean in the winter we have short days. The sun currently it's currently 1 20 in the afternoon and I'm planning on going to the gym later, in a couple of hours, it'll be dark when I go to the gym. In a couple of hours, it will be getting dark. And so the sun sets at 3:30 and it rises at about 7:30 or something like that. So it's not easy to be training when it's light out, just for practical reasons. And more than 60% of pedestrian accidents in winter happen during low light hours. So, obviously, right? You might expect that. So make sure you're seen, stay visible. It's very important. If you're running near roads or you're crossing roads, it's very difficult as a driver to make sure you're seeing absolutely everything. And if someone is wearing black in the winter and they've not got a head torch on, nothing, then it's a very difficult thing to see. And so you've got to be careful. Don't expect that drivers see everything. They don't. Be as obvious and well seen as you possibly can be. I just want to interrupt this episode with a quick mention of Innovate, and specifically I want to talk about their trail flies. The trail flies are a new pair of shoes from Innovate, and they're not quite as intense as the sort of trail talons that are maybe a little bit more optimal for softer terrain, but they're great trail shoes, great general all-round trail shoes. They're foot-shaped, and I fell in love with them before I fell in love with the road flies. I've been running in the trail flies on mixed terrain, whether it's on the pavement or jumping off onto the trails, and they are phenomenal. They're a little bit more minimal than a lot of shoes out there. I think there's a 4mm drop on them and a 4 or a 6mm drop on them, and they're just a great pair of shoes. If you wanted to give them a try and you wanted a 15% discount on the price of these shoes, you can use the code Runnable at checkout at innovate.com, INOV and the number 8.com, and it's Runnable at checkout for 15% off. And I highly recommend the trail flies. Have a go. They're a great pair of shoes. Okay, so that's segment 2, training tips. A few little training tips there. And now I want to talk about gym season. I've just sort of entitled this segment Gym Season, because when I approach a season where it's maybe more difficult to train outside and run all the time, I think to myself, how then can I change my training to focus on the things that I have more time to do? And in the winter, I always end up realizing that this is the time to get in the gym. This is the time to strengthen up. I love running in the summer. I can run for hours and hours at one time in the summer. I love it just so much. There's less faff. You're wearing less, you're dealing with less. And obviously I love training in the winter, but really where I get my top mileage in is in the middle of the year. And that's just simply not happening during the winter months. But what can be happening is going inside into a gym and doing some heavy lifts. So thinking about winter as gym season and shifting your focus from loads of high volume running training to maybe just changing the ratio of your training a bit and having more strength training, more gym training in there. This is the time to get hench. This is the time to get strong. So I would strongly advise thinking about it that way. Use the off season for strength. Strength training can improve running economy by about 8%. So that means you'll run faster using less energy. And it also can help to prevent injuries. I'm endlessly asked questions about how to balance strength training and running, and if I'm strength training then I feel achy for my running and all this sort of stuff. And it's difficult. It's really difficult to balance the two. If you're doing a lot of running, it's difficult to do a lot of strength training. So how about this? How about you ease back on the running in the winter months and you get in the gym and you strengthen up? This is your time. This is the best time of the year to get some heavy lifts in. even if you've got races in spring, you've got a lot of time now in the early stages of your phased approach to your training to get good strength training in, to make the most of this period of time to really strengthen up those muscles, identifying weaknesses when you're in the gym and strengthening them up. So get into it. This is the time to get strong. Cross training as well. Runners, if you're going in the gym and you've got a lot of different options there to cross train. You've got an elliptical, you can get on the stair stepper, you can get on the bike. Cross training is a great way to keep your aerobic fitness and strengthen. Runners who incorporate strength training and cross training in winter are 50% less likely to experience injuries during peak race season. 50% less likely for runners who incorporate strength and cross training in winter. So if you want to be in that 50%, think about it. Think about what you have at your disposal right now. You have a gym environment. I mean, if we're thinking about December, I think, this is the time to get in there. Get in the gym right now and make the most of it. And by the way, January, if you're enjoying your empty December gym, January is the one where it starts crowding up, starts becoming less enjoyable to be in the gym, where there's loads of people. You don't necessarily have access to all the machines. I love seeing loads of people. I kind of like a bit of a crowded gym. I like seeing a lot of people in the gym and that sort of thing. But I do like when the gym's nice and empty. So this is the time, December. So if you're listening to this and it's still December, get in the gym. So cycling, swimming, yoga, elliptical, all that good stuff can build a base for power and injury prevention. It can help to make you more efficient, make you stronger, make you more injury, make you less injury prone. Now, I want to take a second. If we're talking about gym season in segment 3, I want to take a moment to talk about treadmills. I actually today received a question on my Instagram about treadmills. I can't always, if you're listening to this and it was you who sent me that message, sort of see if I can get it up on Instagram. I can't always reply to all of my messages on Instagram. I'm trying to be a bit more strict with how much time I'm zonked out on. Let me just, treadmills, can I search that? Do you ever run on a treadmill? I mean, I've just searched treadmill, and yeah, here we are. No, that's not it. I have a lot of questions about treadmills on my Instagram, and I can't always reply to all my questions on Instagram because otherwise I'd just be locked to my phone the whole time, and I've got to maintain a relationship with the person I love. So I don't want to just be constantly on my phone, but I could quite easily just be endlessly trying to reply to people. But I do see a lot of them come in. So if you do throw me a question, then it's likely I will see it, but I can't always be sitting there typing and responding. But I received a question today about treadmills, and to the person who asked that question, because you said you were a pod listener, and so thanks for sending in the question. I did see it. I want to just talk a little bit about treadmills and, first start talking about, I guess, whether they are a sufficient replacement for running outside. So treadmills, are they a sufficient replacement for running outside? No. If I had to choose a no or a yes answer, I would say no. Treadmills are not the same as running outside. They are being propelled, so that, the belt is moving for you. So you are merely moving you're sort of just moving your legs over the already moving belt, right? So there's not as much power output required in comparison to running outside. However, there are some serious benefits to treadmills. And I would actually say the only shortfall. No, actually, it's not the only shortfall. I'd say there's two kind of major shortfalls, or maybe three. But I'm going to go with two shortfalls of treadmills. The first is that the belt moves for you, so it's not the same as running outside. And we can talk in a second about how you can kind of counter that. The second is that you are not taking on the elements. You're not actually running outside at all. You're in a very controlled environment. So it's not representative of your running performance. When you're in this controlled environment, that can be good for many reasons, but it's not actually preparing you for outdoor running in the best way you possibly can. To prepare for outdoor running, you've got to run outdoors. So it is not a sufficient replacement, but it can be very helpful, and there are some benefits to treadmills. So how can they be used most effectively, I guess, is the way that I'm going to try and frame this. Treadmills, if I would say whenever you're running on a treadmill, you should put the incline up by just a bit, like 1%. That way, you are going to do a few things. You're going to require more from your body. When you've got a bit of an incline on a treadmill, then you are actually required to put a bit more power output into your running motion. It's also going to be potentially a little bit better on your joints. You know, running on a treadmill is better on your joints generally because it's a softer land. The belt's moving for you. But when you're going slightly uphill, you're going to be landing a little bit more on the forefoot and driving up. So there's that benefit too. So I would say always just plonk it up a little bit on 1%, even if you're just doing some easy training, just whack it up a little bit. You can also make sure to use all of the different features on a treadmill. So like, at the end of the day, it's not the same as like doing sprints because you can't suddenly stop it, but you can do like a max incline. And running up a treadmill, if you max out the incline and run up a treadmill, I'm telling you, that's a good workout. That is a very good workout. And you can build a lot of strength in your legs if you just whack that beast up, put it in a serious incline, and then just start marching up it. So really, that's like a great way to use a treadmill. And also, another great way to use a treadmill is for recovery. It is less demanding on your body, but it's a great way to sort of go through the motion form of running without demanding too much, and to getting that blood flow going and using it for recovery is a great idea. So I think the most effective ways to use a treadmill is just put a bit of incline on. If you want to max out that incline, do some hill training, that's great. And also if you want to use it for recovery as well. But just replacing all your runs with treadmill runs is not going to be good because it's not the same as running outside, both from a simple kind of demand on your body, but also the fact that you're not outside taking on the elements, and there's benefit in that as well. So I think that's what I have to say on gym, segment 3, on making the most of going to the gym in this period. You know, when you're in the winter months, prioritizing the gym can be really helpful. You know, consider the winter a bit of a gym season. I do. That's how I consider it. So use that off season when you've not got many races to build that strength up. Cross train. Remember that runners who incorporate strength and cross training in winter are 50% less likely to experience injuries during peak race season. I don't think I'll ever forget that stat. And so cross training, building strength, and thinking about treadmills and how best to use them as well. So next I want to talk about something that I actually think is really interesting. This is really interesting. And I hope you also found it interesting. The reason it's interesting is because it's something that I don't think enough people consider. And that is immune system care. Bit of a weird one, but who no one ever talks about this. I swear no one talks about immune system care during the winter months. And so many people are ill right now. Like every single year, loads of people get really ill. Lots of colds, lots of flus being thrown around. Winter is ripe for it. And, you're more vulnerable in the winter. Cold weather means that you have more immune vulnerability. Winter runners are 2 to 3 times more likely to catch colds or respiratory infections if they overtrain or neglect recovery. I mean, yeah, I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But anyway, I thought I'd throw it in there because people don't think about it. People don't think about how the weather can affect your immune system and how vulnerable you are to getting ill. So why does winter running challenge your immune system? Let's talk about it. So I got 4 little points here about why winter running challenges your immune system. So if you've nodded off and you're out there running right now, I think tune back in, come back to the show, and be with me for a second. Immune system care is something that I think we should think about, something that we should really be careful about when we're training in the winter. Because you don't want to be out with a cold. I don't want any of you to be ill. It sucks being ill. Whenever you're ill, you regret taking not being ill for granted. And I just don't want you being ill. Because I want you to be training. I want you to be training consistently. And yeah, so why does winter running challenge your immune system? Well, cold air plus hard work equals stress on the body. When you exercise in cold weather, your body kind of works overtime to maintain a stable core temperature. And that requires extra energy. And it puts a lot of stress on your immune system. So it becomes more vulnerable to catching colds and your immune system just basically becomes a little bit more vulnerable and less of a protective less of a protector against the colds and the flus and viruses that are thrown around, floating around and flying in the air. When you breathe in cold, dry air, it can actually irritate the respiratory tract, which makes it easier for viruses to take hold, basically. So this cold air and hard work is real stress on the body and means that your immune system is just not as protective. Secondly, sorry, every time there's a random pause, it's because I'm sipping my coffee. So secondly, I want to talk about post-workout immune suppression. So after a hard workout, especially if you've been going for over an hour at a pretty high intensity, or it might be that you've actually gone for a long run for 3 hours. This is going to have the same effect. After that, your immune system is temporarily suppressed for about, well, it depends, but it can be for up to like 3 days. And during this time, you are just more susceptible to catching colds and infections. So be really cognizant of that. If you've gone out on a run that's like 3 hours long, you might feel great. You're not ill. But in the 3 days that follow, you could be more likely to catch a cold. Your immune system could just be that bit weaker. So be very conscious of the fact that when you're training hard, when you're out there, that post-workout immune suppression is a very real thing. So pair that with cold weather. So if you're like going out working hard and you suppress your immune system, you pair that with the cold weather, and well, that's just it's a recipe for vulnerability, I guess. The third point, I would say, on why winter running specifically challenges your immune system is that we know this all too well from COVID. Crowded indoor spaces. Let's be real for a second. Most of us head straight to warm coffee shops and gyms and nice offices after a run, or nice homes. And these are crowded ones, at least, are prime environments for spreading germs, especially during flu season, which we are in. So when you're going for a run, you are putting stress on your body, you're breathing in cold air, then you're going into a crowded space in flu season. I think we're onto one. If you're wanting to get ill, that's how you do it. And the fourth point here is dehydration is sneaky in winter. Dehydration is a sneaky thing in winter. I think we all know this, but when you are out in cold weather, that cold weather actually reduces your thirst response. So you don't feel like taking a drink. So you are actually less likely to hydrate. I'm not going to just throw a false stat out there, but I feel like you're more likely to be dehydrated in cold weather sometimes because you're just less likely to drink and hydrate. And dehydration weakens your immune system and it impacts recovery. So they're the four things, you got cold air and hard work, stress on the body, post-workout immune suppression, crowded indoor spaces, and dehydration being a little bit more sneaky. That's all a recipe for getting ill. All of that is fine, and I really want to make sure that you are cognizant of it. But I want to also just take a moment to talk about the potential benefits of cold exposure on the immune system. I had a message the other day saying something about, being careful because I might get ill, which I've just obviously spoken about for a long time. And I think that's fair. I was running in the cold and then someone said, be careful. But there is also something to be said for exposing yourself to cold temperatures to strengthen the immune system in a controlled way. And there's a lot of short-term studies on this. There's not a huge amount of long-term stuff. So, I'm not trying to tell you that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that ice baths make your immune system stronger. I don't necessarily know that to be true, but there is some science being done on all this stuff, and I don't want to dive too deeply into it. I have some notes here, but there's some interesting stuff, like cold showers and white blood cell activation. A study published in PLOS ONE 2016 found that people who took cold showers were 29% less likely to call in sick from work over 30 days. The hypothesis is that cold exposure may stimulate an increase in white blood cells, specifically natural killer cells, which are essential for fighting infections. But that study was not long term. So, and also, I don't want to be sort of telling you to go and take cold showers and all this stuff and not emphasize the importance of good nutrition and sleep. Because you have to get the fundamentals right before you do all this fancy stuff. But if you are just inside the whole time and your body is not working hard to, regulate body temperature and this sort of stuff, then you could be more vulnerable to colds and flus. So, you want to improve that circulation. Brief exposure to cold water. Excuse me, I think I just hit the mic. Brief exposure to cold water or air can improve circulation of blood vessels. And, that process might help transport immune cells more efficiently through the body. So, I think don't think that going outside will just get you ill. In a controlled way, a bit of exposure to the cold is good for you. You can adapt your adaptive stress response It's good. Exposure to the cold can, sort of act as a controlled stressor. You can teach your body to better regulate, and that's good stuff. So, we've spoken a bit about the immune system, how you are going to be more vulnerable in this period, so really be cognizant of that. Why you're going to be more vulnerable. The potential benefits of being exposed to the cold on your immune system. Now let's just very quickly talk about some practical tips. So what then? A bit of a so what. Well, firstly, hydration is really quite critical in this. Research shows that cold air dehydrates runners faster because your body works harder to humidify the air you breathe. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I think that's really interesting. And, that on top of the fact that you're not taking on fuel, hydration. There we go. It's not a fuel ad, don't worry. You're not taking on hydration, you're not taking on water as much because you just don't feel like that thirsty. And then actually your body is working much harder to humidify the air you breathe, so you can get more dehydrated. And dehydration can weaken the immune system. So make sure that you're hydrating. That's one really important tip I will give you. Then fueling for recovery is my second tip. Focus on, if you don't have some sort of vitamins that you're taking, I would recommend it. I've always been someone who wasn't really into it. Not really any good reason, but now, believe in intellectual honesty, and I've learned that actually taking supplements is very good, and science shows that it's very good for individuals. So I now take supplements. It's not sponsored, but I do use Heights. I do have a code for Heights. I can't remember it now. Tommy15, I think. But I use their Biotic, which is great. But yeah, you want to focus on like zinc, vitamin C, and probiotics. That can all boost your immunity. So think about some sort of kind of fueling for recovery and taking supplements. And then finally, I will say as well, adjust your intensity during these times. We've spoken about going into the gym and maybe increasing the amount of gym work you're doing. I would also think about just decreasing your general intensity of your training outside as well. At the moment, I know that last night I was at a friend's 30th, and my friend has been going a bit hard recently, and he felt a bit under the weather, and he's had a huge week. He's been, there's all sorts of Christmas stuff going on, but he's also quit his job, and he's got a new job, so he's excited for that. But and then it's his birthday, he's organising that, and he's just a bit run down, and he's losing his voice, and that's because your immune system in these times is weaker. And even if you're trying to go at the same rate, then you will get ill. And I can feel that coming on for me as well at the moment. I'm not ill yet, but today I'm taking a day off running, and I'm going to just go to the gym later. And I don't need to go and challenge myself intensely in these times. I'm maintaining through my winter. So make sure you adjust your intensity accordingly. If you're under any risk, if you feel like you're under any risk of getting ill, think about how you can adjust things. Studies suggest that running at lower intensities in winter reduces immune suppression, especially after long runs. So think about that. So far, we've gone through 4 of the 5 segments. We've spoken about, is winter running worth it? Yes, it is. You get that mental toughness. Consistency is key, and you can avoid that spring regret. Winter miles equals summer smiles. And then we've spoken about training tips for winter, layering properly, how that all works, why overheating is a problem. And then we've spoken, of course, about gym sessions, your gym season, and sort of maybe even swapping out some of your runs with gym sessions. And getting a lot of strength in this period can be something you can take advantage of. Cross-training benefits, how to use a treadmill in the most effective way, immune system care. And now let's talk a little bit about just staying motivated to get out the door. I'm very aware of what I'm talking about. I'm aware that it's harder to get out the door for a lot of people in the winter. I'm also very aware that it's different for men and it's different for women. When the months are darker, it's difficult to fit in the time. If I was for whatever reason more afraid to run in the dark, the most obvious reason for that for people would be if you're a woman, you might feel more uncomfortable or less comfortable running in the dark. So you have to think about how to adjust things, how to maybe, adapt your day, or maybe it is that you have to prioritize training in the gym. And it's much harder. It's just much harder. But I want to try and, I guess, sort of, help you think about some mindset tricks. I don't have any mindset tricks, but that's what I'm calling them. I have another little stat here for you. Research shows that habits form faster when tied to environmental cues. So, so setting out your running gear the night before can increase the chances of sticking to a workout by over 40%. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the organization of it all, really. This isn't a mindset trick. I sort of skipped that bit. I've skipped to that bit. But I wanted to just talk about some practical things. It's gonna be harder to motivate yourself to get out the door. So just make it real easy for yourself. Make it as easy as possible. Make it so that your morning self thanks your evening self. If you are getting up in the morning to go for a run, when you're 8 hours, when you're waking up after 7 or 8 hours of sleeping, 6 or 7 hours of sleeping, you're gonna be pretty tired, and that tired morning self is not gonna want to go out for a run. So you want your evening self to kind of be standing over you and just handing you your running kit and handing you a coffee, making it really easy. So how I do that is by setting out my running kit. I know what I'm going to be wearing. I have some options there as well, so I can check the temperature on my phone, and then I can just choose. Okay, so I've got all my options here. My kit's here. Lou's still sleeping. I'm trying to use my phone torch to just make sure I don't disturb, and then I'm putting on my clothes. Depending on the temperature, I might put extra layers on that I have, and then I go and make my coffee. And if I've been hyper organized, my evening self has been really helpful to my morning self, then the coffee stuff will be out already and the kettle will be filled so I can boil it. And I just make it as easy as I possibly can to get out the door, to start the process. So that's what I would say it's not about motivation. It's about being disciplined. It's about being organized and about making promises to yourself and keeping them, and, being someone with integrity for yourself. Use winter running as an adventure. You can look at a winter and get kind of excited by the challenge of it. Think of it like that. Don't think of it like, I gotta do winter. Think of it like, yeah, let's do this winter. And, there's been a bit of a thing online about the winter arc. People sort of getting they put like dark tones over their videos with, music over their gym videos. It's all about the winter arc. I think, to be honest, as cringe as all of that content is, it's actually it's quite good because they're looking at it in a sort of adventurous way. Like we're going into the winter, and they're proud of being someone who trains through the winter. I think that's kind of good. Another little tip is making it social. Training partners, it's a really helpful thing. I met up with a mate the other day to go for a run, and it's just, the miles flew by. We were chatting through it. So, training partners does boost motivation, and by a lot, and you're going to be accountable to that person. So you're more likely to show up. So maybe finding some partners, and then that's going to be beneficial as well. Whoever you are, but if you are, for whatever reason, afraid to train in the dark alone, finding someone to run with is going to be a really helpful thing there. So try and connect with other people. Try and make that running thing in your day a bit more of an organized social event through the winter, just to help you out. And then this is my greatest and grandest tip for training in the winter. Are you ready? It's not that deep. It's not that deep. Like, the more you think of training in the winter as a big deal, the less you'll show up. Think of it rather as just something you do. You're just training, and it's just that time of year. It's not that deep. Sorry to tell you, it's not that tough to do exercise through the winter. You're not that hardcore. It's not that deep. Just do it. Just do your training. Don't think about it too much. Go through the motions. Usually running in the rain or running in the cold, it's not ever as bad as you think, really, most of the time. The gym is exactly the same in the winter as it is the summer. And yeah, so everyone is doing these winter arc videos on Instagram and TikTok and stuff, and they're training in a gym. It's like, dude, it's the same temperature in the gym in the winter as it is the summer if it's got aircon. So it's not that hardcore. But yeah, my greatest tip when thinking about training in the winter is it's not that deep. You're not that impressive for getting out there. You're just going through the motions. And if you can put less of a big thing on it, make it less of a big deal, I do believe you'll show up more consistently. Because you're not thinking, because you're not sort of listening. When other people tell me when I'm training in the winter that they're impressed that I'm training in the winter, I try not to kind of listen to that, because I don't want to feel all that impressed with myself for training in the winter. It's just what I do. It's just part of, like, I train all year round. This is just the season we're in. It's not a question of whether I'm training or not because of the winter weather. I just am. So, hope that helps as a little bit of a mindset tip, mindset shift, trick for getting out the door. Okay, they're my 5 segments to winter training. I've summarized most of it already, so I won't summarize it again too much. But yeah, we went through winter running. Is it worth it? Yes. Some training tips for winter running. Making sure you're prioritizing gym and strength training. A bit about immune system care. Look after yourself out there. And a little bit of a kind of reframing of how you think about winter training to just get you out the door. Just get you going. So, some closing thoughts. I don't have anything noted down for this. But I just want to say that winter running is not about perfection. It's not about getting everything right. I mean, no running is. But winter especially. Really, winter running is an opportunity for you to just practice having a consistent practice. Practice showing up. If you can show up consistently through winter, then as the spring comes, as the temperatures start to rise a little bit, the days start to lengthen, you can then start really working a bit harder as it gets easier to show up, as there's less to think about. You can then start putting in the work and be thankful for your winter self, for staying consistent, for maintaining throughout, and for just doing what we do. And that is showing up for yourself no matter what. So, maybe if I were to finish on a little challenge for you. Throughout this winter, for the rest of December, January, February, and some of March, set a bit of a goal. Maybe a streak, maybe a mileage milestone, or the time you spend out training. Or maybe it's more of a focus in the gym. Maybe you're going to set some gym goals, some lift goals. Maybe you want to make sure you're training at least 3 times a week. Whatever it is, set some goals for yourself this winter. Forget New Year's resolutions. Look at the winter, set some goals, and see where you're at as the spring comes. I promise you, You won't regret it. Okay, we've reached that part of the episode where we do some listener questions. So if you are new to this and you don't know already, you can actually submit your own listener question, whether it's a specific question you have or a topic you think might be interesting to discuss. You can submit that with the link in the show notes. It'll say submit a question. You click on that link and it'll take you to a little voice recording web app where you can record a little 1-minute voice clip, and we can use it for a future episode. So if you have a burning question of your own and you want to get involved in that way, I'd love to hear from you. We're trying to work our way through all the questions as they come in, and then every now and then if they do accumulate and pile up, then we can do a bit of a Q&A session specifically. But I try and cover off so 3 or 4 questions. Today we have 3 questions for you. And so why don't we just go ahead and get started? The first question is from John.
Hey Tommy, John Wignall here. I've got a question regarding ultramarathons because I signed up for one next year. It's 50 miles with 11,000 foot of elevation. What tips specifically around equipment can you advise? This will be more than just shoes and nutrition. Loving all your content. Keep up the good work. Cheers.
Great question. Very good question. When you enter into the ultra world, there's a lot more to think about when it comes to gear. A lot more. And so you're doing a 50 miler with 11,000 feet of elevation. So that's about 80k. And what's 11,000 feet? Is that like 3,000 meters? Something like that. So there'll be a lot of climbing. So I guess not to overcomplicate it, I want to just give you a couple of key things that I would make sure to consider. Firstly, when we're thinking about your footwear, you want to make sure you've got trail shoes. I have seen people in front of me on a very wet ultra I saw one guy once wearing some on running road shoes, and he was slipping everywhere and really struggling. You want to have some trail shoes, so make sure you're wearing some sort of trail shoes. The second piece of gear that I would recommend, especially for something that is a lot of elevation and you're not necessarily used to that amount of elevation or that amount of climbing, is some poles. If you can get some running poles, I use Lecky poles. They are the best because they have a certain clicking system, but you can get poles from anywhere. I used to have some Alp Kit poles. They were good. Well, I do still have them, but I prefer my Lecky poles. So poles are really helpful, trekking poles, because they just give you that extra stability and extra power output marching up the hills. And then a race pack that is comfortable. And you want to be training with your race pack as much as possible because you want to be carrying hydration and all sorts of fuel. So trail shoes, trekking poles, running poles, and a race pack. And then outside of that, it's all personal preference. But when it comes to kit, depending on the weather, you want to make sure you've got some dry kit, some wet kit, and you keep the dry. So a dry bag is always something that's really helpful, I think, on these things. So you have some layers that you can put on even in just the aid stations so you can warm up and keep them nice and dry, keeping it all in a dry bag. And then an extra layer, like a windproof or waterproof layer, because it's a long old journey that you're going to go on. Do check the race guidelines. A lot of these races do have kit lists that they would recommend, so get involved in that. And then a general rule, I think, is it's quite easy to overcomplicate it. I remember my first few ultras, I overthought all of the gear, I overpacked, and I hardly used any of it. But it's a balance to strike. You don't want to overpack and not use any of it, but you don't want to underpack and not have it ready. So it's better to have your kit there that you don't use in case of emergencies than not have it at all. And on that front, making sure you've got a first aid kit as well with you is going to be really important. So there's some things I would recommend, John, to think about having for your first ultra. Good luck with it. Don't overcomplicate it, and run the Runnable. Thanks for the question. Okay, the next question we have here is from Ryan.
Hello, Tommy. Ryan from Esperance in Western Australia. Thanks for all the hard work that you're putting in. Really have enjoyed the podcast. It's my weekly therapy session, so appreciate that. My question relates to building a marathon plan. under really busy life circumstances. So 3 little kids, busy full-time job, community involvement, with maybe 5 or 6 hours of capacity per week. So it's really difficult to fit in the 70, 80, 100 kilometres per week. Is it simply a case of tempering expectation and therefore lowering on a relative scale the distances? Is that how you may vary a marathon plan when you're limited by time? And is that the best way to approach it? Thanks, Tommy. Looking forward to the response.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic. A lot of people obviously have time limitations. If you think you only have 5 or 6 hours a week, thinking about how you can use those hours is going to be really important. Making sure that you're getting just as much volume as you can get in that time. So actually spending 6 hours training is going to be really important. How I would think of it is, really trying to prioritize your long run every week is going to be probably the thing that will make the biggest difference. If you can do a long run once a week, and the long run, long in inverted commas, is going to be different depending on the volume you have. But if you can do that, then you're going to train your endurance a lot more in that kind of later stage of that long run. So it's all very well doing loads of sort of shorter runs that will build endurance eventually, but making sure those runs are nice and long and you're spending 2 or 3 hours out running is a great thing to be able to do. If you can negotiate with the people around you and make sure that they are kind of with you on this journey to the marathon, then that's going to help as well. I think a lot of people sign up to a marathon and then just don't necessarily bring their close ones, their close loved ones along with them for the journey. Emphasizing the importance of getting the training in so that you don't get injured, so that you can perform at your best to your friends and family is important, because those people can step in where needed, whether it's on a Sunday looking after the kids or whatever is taking your time that they can kind of help you with, and then figuring out how you can help them in return. That is a helpful thing to do. So, I think I'm not going to try and be a life coach to you and try and tell you to manage your life in a certain way. It is worth considering whether the marathon distance is doable for you on such limited amount of time that you can train. But yes, it is sort of a case, Ryan, of lowering your expectations, tempering your expectations, as you put it, and making sure that you recognize that with the limited amount of time you can train and you can dedicate to marathon training, it might just be that marathon ends up being something that's just that bit more challenging and that you're slightly less prepared for. But if you can stay strict with the time you are allocating to marathon training, and you're really using all of those hours as productively as you can with good amounts of easy training, a medium run, a long run, and throwing in at least one, I would say actually just one quality session, whether it's tempo, intervals in there per week, is really how I would do it, probably. Strength training is also important. So think as much as you can about how you can put in that strength training, whether it's just one session a week of dedicated strength training, or even, stuff outside of your training. It's going to be important to make sure you're keeping on top of that strength work. Another thing I would say is that a lot of people sort of neglect what they're doing outside of their training. There's a lot of stuff you can be doing, whether it's walking to work or just spending more time on the feet, or doing some squats when you're waiting for the kettle to boil. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to kind of add on to your training in your everyday life. So standing instead of sitting, or walking around, taking like walking meetings, getting a bit of volume outside of your training, or some active recovery, being on your feet a little bit more. That's going to help. That will help towards building that volume and building endurance in your body to make sure you're prepared a little bit more for the marathon distance. But yeah, it's going to be tough. When you're running a marathon, when you're training for a marathon, it is important to put the time in. And I think too many people sign up for marathons that don't have the time to train for it. And that is a recipe for injuries and all sorts of problems. So make sure you are just training smart and using your time wisely, doing a lot of easy training, a lot of volume accumulation, and it might just be that you spend a longer period of time training overall for that marathon. I hope that helps. It's a difficult topic because the realities of life are that you have a lot on outside of your running, and you want to do these things, you want to train for these big things, but sometimes it's going to be harder than if you had all the time in the world. So just manage your expectations, be serious about your training when you can do it, negotiate with the people around you to make sure that they see the importance of this to you and see how you can kind of adapt things. And it might be that it's actually only kind of the later stages of your training where you maybe sort of for 4 or 5 weeks where you're dedicating more time to it than 5 or 6 hours a week. But it is possible to run a marathon with that amount of training if you do it right. So I hope that helps, Ryan. I appreciate the question, and good luck with it. Okay, the next and final question we have is from Gabriel.
Hello, Tommy. This is Andre from Philippines, and I've been a huge fan of you, and I've been following your podcast. And I just want to say congrats to your podcast, and I appreciate it. I always listen to it when I run. So the question here is, what do you do when you're experiencing bad runs? Like, to give you context, I ran a 4:56 per km last week for 8 kilometers, and then for today's speed work, I just did it a while ago. I couldn't handle a 5:30 km for just 2 kilometers, considering I did 4:56 for 8 km last week. So I don't know. I'm kind of disheartened, and I don't know what to do, and I don't even know. I fueled properly and I slept properly, but yeah, that's my question. How do you handle this type of stuffs? Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, Andre. I called you Gabriel there because it got written down Gabriel Andre as your name. So sorry if I misnamed you there, but great question. It is very easy to feel disheartened about your training week on week. It might be that you've smashed your training, you've done really well one week, and then the following week you just don't have it in you. And there's a whole myriad of reasons why this could be the case. Sometimes you think you're having good sleep, and you think you're resting properly, and nutrition's on point and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes, like we've discussed in this episode, your immune system is jacked and the weather's affecting you, and there's just all sorts of things that could be affecting you. So the only thing I'd say on this is you really got to think about long-term goals. And when you're thinking about comparing yourself too much to your previous self last week, you can get quite disheartened like you are. And it's just really not worth getting disheartened, because all of the consistent work you're putting in is contributing to you improving as a runner. Long term, you will be improving. And when you are really measuring your performance, maybe on a race day, you're preparing yourself for that race day with tapering beforehand, getting your nutrition on point, getting a lot of sleep in, and not stressing your body. But midway through your training, you're going to be a lot more stressed. Like, your body's going to be a lot more stressed. There's going to be all these things coming in that your body's dealing with. And so essentially it's very likely that you'll have a run that you might want to compare to a previous run, a comparable run. Maybe last week you did an 8K with the same goals in mind. This week you did an 8K with the same goals in mind, but you didn't perform as well, and it could be frustrating. But think about that long-term accumulation of volume, the long-term goals, the fact that you're showing up. It's not about necessarily the paces and splits you're hitting all the time. Sometimes it's just about effort and managing that effort appropriately. So the only thing I'd say, Andre, is don't worry about it. It's very normal. It's to be expected that you will sometimes perform worse than a previous week. And you might not even know why. You might not ever find out why. But just be a bit more gracious on yourself, a bit more kind to yourself, and recognize that you're putting in the work. That's what matters. And really, everything else is not worth stressing over. If you're stressing too much over each split, then it might affect your training in a bigger way than it needs to. So you're still putting in the work. You're still gaining a lot of benefit from the work you're putting in. You can still gain as much benefit if you're going at a 5:30 pace 1 week and a 4:30 pace the previous week. You're still gaining the same amount of benefit. Still time on the feet. It's still a certain amount of time in that effort zone. So you can still gain from it. It just might be that you're performing, you know, your performance is a bit less impressive or whatever than the previous week. So don't worry too much about it. It happens to me all the time. One week I'll go out and, you know, I'll be easily running a 4:30. It'll feel real easy and my heart rate's nice and low. And then the next week I can't do it and I'm running a 5:30 and it feels about the same. It happens to us all. It's normal. You can still gain a lot of training benefit from it. And think about the long term. Keep putting in that consistent effort and you will improve over time. I promise you. Okay, that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening in. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope it was helpful. I hope it got you thinking about how you can take on the winter months and wrap up well and do all the things that you need to do appropriately. Let's go over at least a little bit about what we went through. Yeah. Is it worth it? Is winter training worth it? Yes. Training tips for winter. Focus on the gym. Get strong in this season. Take care of your immune system. And it's not that deep. Don't worry about it. If everyone thinks that you're a machine for training in the winter, don't listen. It's very normal. It should just be normal for you to train in the winter. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening. If you want to check out the show notes, there's some links in there. Check out Innovate. You get 15% off with the code Runnable. There's a couple of races in there that I'm highlighting as well. Devil's Gulch is my first 100 miler. They've got a 50 miler and a half marathon out in the States in the Eastern Cascades near Seattle. I'll be there next year. You can join me if you want with a little bit of a discount. And then we've got Lone Wolf as well. They're doing some more races next year. We've got a discount for that too. Bit more accessible for those of you in the UK. If you want to join me in March for a backyard ultra, or a backyard inspired ultra at least, then check Lone Wolf out as well. Thanks again for listening. Run the Runnable. Keep showing up for yourself, and I'll see you next time.